The crash had been sudden and merciless, leaving the shuttle in pieces scattered across the frozen surface of the nameless moon. And as the wind howled across jagged cliffs of ice, Lieutenant Aaron Cole pulled himself from the wreckage, his breath forming clouds that instantly crystallized in the bitter air, while his eyes searched desperately for any sign of other survivors. He had been trained to expect emergencies, but nothing quite prepared him for the reality of being stranded in a place so hostile that even standing still too long risked death by frostbite. Then he saw her, Kyra, the alien cadet who had been seated across from him before the alarm screamed, her slender crystalline form half buried under shards of twisted metal. Without thinking, Aaron stumbled toward her, ignoring the sting of his wounds, and with frozen fingers he pulled aside the wreckage until she was free. Her glowing eyes opened faintly, flickering with both confusion and pride, and for a moment she did not thank him, only stood with a rigid defiance that made him realize she was far from helpless. Yet the situation was cruelly clear. Their distress beacon was weak, the signal barely scratching through the storm overhead, and if rescue came at all, it would not come soon. The night was already pressing in, temperatures plummeting, and even Kira's crystalline skin, supposedly more resistant to cold than flesh, was beginning to lose its faint shimmer, a dangerous sign of energy depletion in her kind. Aaron knew that alone neither of them would last long, but the cadet's rigid posture told him she had little interest in accepting help from a human. Still, as the howling storm swept over them, the practical truth loomed heavier than her pride. Survival meant cooperation. Aaron's military training urged him into motion, and he quickly gathered scraps from the wreckage, insulation panels, shards of metal, and whatever could serve as a barrier against the endless wind. He dragged them to a shallow hollow beside a cliff wall, where the ice provided at least one shield from the elements. Kira watched him, arms crossed, her breath shallow as though she could not decide whether to stop him or allow his crude shelter to take form. At last, when the wall of salvaged metal stood high enough to break the gale, she finally spoke in a voice sharp as shattered glass. "Humans do not endure this kind of cold. You will freeze before the next sunrise." Aaron paused, meeting her eyes, and shrugged. "Maybe, but I'd rather try than sit still and let it happen." His words seemed to unsettle her, as if the idea of risking effort without certainty was alien to her species. But she said nothing more. Together, though wordless, they pushed the wreckage tighter into the hollow, and soon the rough lean-to gave them at least some protection from the storm's bite. Inside the shelter, the silence grew heavier, broken only by the wind's endless roar beyond. Aaron checked the small distress beacon, its blinking light weak and erratic, and when he tapped the display, the numbers mocked him. Power drained fast, signal unstable. At best, help might come in 2 or 3 days. At worst, it might not come at all. He tried not to let the fear show, but he noticed Kira's glowing eyes fix on the beacon as if she too could read the grim news. She remained still, yet her posture betrayed unease, the faint dimming of her crystalline skin more obvious now. To her kind, he recalled from briefing reports that loss of glow meant energy depletion, a slow decline into weakness. They were both vulnerable, though she would never admit it aloud. The hours dragged into night and the temperature plunged further. Aaron sat with his arms wrapped around himself, every breath searing his lungs with icy pain. Across from him, Kira's shoulders had begun to tremble despite her stubbornly rigid expression, her pride clearly at war with her body's limits. He thought of saying something, perhaps an offer to share the emergency rations he had pulled from the wreck, but her fierce gaze made him hesitate. Instead, he simply slid the pack closer between them, letting the choice rest with her. Minutes later, when she thought he was not watching, her hand reached out, pale crystals glinting faintly as she took a ration bar and broke it with delicate precision. She ate slowly, her eyes never leaving him, as though acknowledging his offer but refusing to grant him the satisfaction of gratitude. Aaron only nodded, understanding without words that in her world, admitting weakness was dangerous. Yet as the storm grew harsher, her silence began to shift. She asked, almost as though testing him, "Why did you pull me from the wreckage? My people would not expect such a risk for an outsider." Aaron leaned back, weary but firm, because leaving you there wasn't an option. His voice carried, no heroism, only plain fact, but it seemed to unsettle her more than grand words would have. She looked away quickly, though not before he saw the faint shimmer of light return briefly to her crystalline skin. Through the long, frozen night, they took turns keeping the beacon alive, shielding it from snow and checking its weak pulse of signal. The wind clawed at their shelter, and more than once Aaron thought it would collapse, but each time Kira silently braced it with her weight, her determination proving as steady as stone. Though she remained outwardly distant, Aaron began to sense the unspoken shift. She was no longer merely tolerating his presence but matching his resolve with her own. When dawn finally broke, weak light spilling over the icy cliffs, both knew their struggle was far from over. Food was limited, the beacon still weak, and the storm showed no sign of fading. Yet something had changed between them. Pride and distrust still lingered, but beneath it, survival had forced them into an alliance neither would have chosen. Aaron tightened his coat, glanced at Kira, and saw in her eyes not contempt, but something closer to reluctant respect. Whatever awaited them in the days ahead, whether rescue or a fight for their lives, they would face it together, for the frozen moon left no other choice. The frozen moon stretched out in endless plains of ice, jagged ridges glimmering faintly under the pale light of its distant sun, and Lieutenant Aaron Cole felt the weight of the silence pressing down heavier than the cold itself. A silence broken only by the faint crunch of his boots and the brittle sound of shifting frost. Kira, the crystalline cadet, walked a few paces behind him, her translucent form catching fragments of light like shards of glass, her posture stiff, her eyes wary, as though she could not decide whether she was walking with an ally or a stranger, who might turn into a threat at any moment. The shuttle wreck was long out of sight now, abandoned after Aaron had salvaged all he could: thermal blankets, ration packs, a half-working beacon. But even with those, their chances of survival seemed thin, and both knew it, though neither wanted to speak the thought aloud. For hours they had trudged across the icy waste, searching for any terrain that could shield them from the wind, until at last Aaron spotted a shadowed hollow between two ridges, a place where jagged rock broke through the sea of ice. "Here," he said quietly, his voice hoarse from the cold air, and though Kira hesitated as if unwilling to follow his lead, she stepped into the hollow, watching as Aaron knelt and began stacking shards of frozen stone into a crude barrier against the wind. She did not offer help at first, her sharp eyes glittering as though she believed such work beneath her. But as the wind cut sharper and the temperature sank lower, she finally crouched beside him, her crystalline fingers surprisingly deft as she fitted stones together, their breath mixing in the narrow space between them. When the barrier was done, Aaron unrolled the thermal blanket and fixed the small emergency heater on the ground, its weak red glow offering just enough warmth to keep frostbite at bay. They sat opposite each other, their shadows long and shifting, in the dim glow, and for a long time neither spoke, both too proud and too cautious to be the one to break the silence. Finally, Kira's voice, melodic yet edged with disdain, cut through the stillness. "Humans are not made for this world. Your body burns through heat too quickly. Your skin offers no defense. You will not last long." Aaron met her gaze evenly, his jaw set against her words. "Maybe not," he admitted. "But neither of us will last if we don't work together." His calm tone seemed to irritate her more than any retort could have, for she shifted uncomfortably, the faint inner light of her crystalline veins flickering with tension. "Ilari do not rely on outsiders," she said stiffly. "Especially not humans." Aaron leaned back against the stone, exhaustion pressing on his shoulders, yet his eyes stayed steady. "Then consider this. You don't have to rely on me. Just stay alive long enough for rescue. If you can manage that without me, be my guest." The words hung in the air like frost, and for a moment Kira's prideful silence returned, though Aaron thought he saw a shadow of doubt in her luminous eyes. Hours stretched into a long, freezing night, and as the heater's glow dimmed, Aaron wrapped the blanket tighter around his shoulders, forcing himself to stay awake, while Kira sat stiff-backed, her glowing veins dimming as though conserving. her own energy. Yet as the cold seeped deeper, a shiver ran through her crystalline frame, a faint tremor she tried to hide, but Aaron caught it. Without speaking, he lifted the edge of the blanket and held it open. Her pride flared instantly. "I do not need," she began, but the tremor betrayed her again, and for a heartbeat her eyes met his, seeing not mockery, but a quiet offer of survival. Slowly, with rigid hesitation, she moved closer, sitting beside him under the shared blanket, their shoulders brushing lightly, the faint hum of her crystalline body oddly soothing against the gnawing cold. Neither spoke again. Yet something shifted in that silence, a fragile thread of necessity binding them together. By morning, the heater had died completely, and the pale light revealed the endless white horizon once more. Aaron packed their supplies, in silence while Kira watched, her expression unreadable, though he noticed she no longer walked behind him but beside him as they left the hollow. The day wore on with no sign of rescue, no friendly signal on the scanner, only the endless glare of ice and sky, and fatigue gnawed at Aaron's limbs, while hunger sharpened his thoughts. When they stumbled upon a fissure in the ice, a crack, wide enough to descend into, Aaron suggested they explore it for shelter or perhaps trapped water. Kira hesitated, her crystalline form catching the light like warning fire, and whispered of creatures that lurked in such depths, old stories of the Alari who vanished into frozen caverns. Aaron, with no stories to guide him, only nodded and said, "Then we'll be careful." Together they climbed down into the fissure, their breath echoing in the narrow descent, until the walls opened into a cavern of shimmering ice, its walls alive with shifting light, beautiful and eerie. But beauty did not hide danger. A distant rumble echoed through the cavern, low and resonant, and Kira froze, her glowing veins flaring in warning. "Something else is here," she whispered. Aaron tightened his grip on the survival blade at his belt, his heart hammering as shadows stirred at the far edge of the cavern. The uneasy alliance between human and alien had only just begun, but already the frozen moon was reminding them both that survival would demand more than pride, more than endurance. It would demand trust neither was ready to give. The cavern stretched wider than either Aaron or Kira expected, its frozen walls reflecting fractured beams of pale light, casting illusions that made every corner seem alive with shifting forms. And for a moment, Aaron wondered if the cavern itself was playing tricks on his mind. But then the rumble came, again deeper this time, rolling through the ice like the growl of something ancient that had slumbered too long. Kira's crystalline frame stiffened, the light in her veins pulsing faster, betraying emotions she would never admit. And Aaron could see the faint shimmer of frost shaking loose from the walls with every vibration. He gripped his survival blade, tightly, its edge little comfort against something that could shake the ground, and his mind raced through scenarios. Collapsed ice, a geothermal vent, or worse, a living creature adapted to these frozen depths. The air grew colder as they moved deeper, each breath curling into mist that lingered unnaturally in the still air. And Aaron realized with growing unease that even the faint howling winds outside could no longer be heard, as though the cavern had swallowed them whole. Kira moved ahead cautiously, her crystalline body glowing softly like a lantern, yet every flicker of her light seemed to reveal shapes just beyond sight, shadows that slithered away before either could be sure they were real. Aaron wanted to call out, to break the heavy silence pressing down on them, but he knew noise might invite attention, and instinct told him the cavern was not empty. Their boots crunched over frozen ground until suddenly Kira halted, one crystalline, hand raised sharply, her face tense with listening. Aaron strained his ears, and then he heard it too, a faint clicking, irregular, echoing from the darkness ahead. It was not the sound of shifting ice or dripping water, but something deliberate, something alive. Kira whispered, "Ice burrowers," her voice low and sharp, and though Aaron had never heard of such things, the fear in her tone was enough to make his pulse quicken. She explained quickly, her words clipped, that the Alari told old warnings of creatures that tunneled through frozen moons, unseen until they surrounded their prey. "Stories," Aaron muttered, though doubt thickened his voice. Yet the clicking grew louder, multiplying, circling them like a chorus rising from every direction. Without a word, Kira darted toward a narrow passage cutting deeper into the cavern, and Aaron followed, his survival blade held ready, his eyes scanning the icy walls that now seemed to shimmer with movement. The passage twisted sharply, leading them into a chamber where crystalline pillars jutted up like jagged teeth, and between them Aaron thought he saw movement, slender shapes sliding through the ice as though it were water, their bodies faintly luminous. One emerged fully, crawling onto the cavern floor. A long, insect-like form with legs of sharp ice and eyes that glowed with pale blue fire. Its clicking mandibles clattered, echoing against the cavern walls, and within moments, more appeared, slipping out of the frozen walls as though the ice itself had birthed them. Aaron's breath caught as he counted at least 6, their bodies shifting with unnerving grace. Kira stood beside him, her veins glowing brighter, her crystalline body refracting the faint light like a beacon, and Aaron realized she was making herself brighter deliberately, drawing the creature's attention. "Why are you—" he began, but she cut him off sharply. "They follow warmth. They follow light. Better they see me than you." Her voice carried both pride and resignation, and though Aaron wanted to argue, he saw her trembling stance, the tension in her frame, and understood that this was not arrogance but sacrifice. Yet he could not allow her to stand alone. With a quick movement, he tore a strip from the thermal blanket and lit it with the emergency torch, the flame flickering weakly, but enough to catch the creature's glowing eyes. He waved it high, drawing some of them toward him instead, the clicking chorus rising as they shifted direction, their spindly legs scraping over the ice. "Run!" he hissed. But Kira did not move. Instead, she reached into the small satchel slung over her crystalline shoulder and pulled out a shard of crystal that glowed with inner light, humming faintly like a living thing. Aaron had no time to question as she hurled the shard into the middle of the cavern, where it shattered into fragments that blazed with a brilliant pulse, flooding the chamber with a sudden wave of light. The creatures shrieked in a high-pitched clatter, recoiling from the glow, their bodies writhing against the walls as though the light burned them. Seizing the moment, Aaron grabbed Kira's arm and pulled her toward another narrow opening on the far side of the chamber, and together they scrambled through just as the glow began to fade and the creatures surged back into motion. They ran through the twisting passage, their breath ragged, the clicking still chasing them from behind, until at last the tunnel opened into a new chamber, vast and silent, its ceiling lost in shadows. Here no clicking followed, and for the first time since entering the cavern, there was stillness. Aaron collapsed against the wall, panting, while Kira stood, her inner glow dimmed from exhaustion, yet her eyes still sharp. "What was that?" Aaron demanded, his voice low but intense. Kira's gaze lingered on the chamber around them, wary, as if she did not trust the silence. "The shard was a flare crystal," she said softly. "My people use them to mark passages. But I only had one." Her voice carried both relief and regret, and Aaron understood the unspoken truth. They had escaped for now, but they would not survive another encounter without it. The silence pressed in again, heavy with unspoken questions, and Aaron realized that the frozen moon was not merely a battlefield of cold and hunger. It was alive with secrets, with predators, and with dangers neither human nor Ilari had ever faced together. He met Kira's eyes in the dim glow, seeing for the first time not just the proud cadet who distrusted him, but a survivor bound by the same fragile thread of chance. The cavern around them remained still, but in that stillness, Aaron could not shake the feeling that the real threat had only begun to reveal itself. The chamber stretched out before them like the hollow of a forgotten world, its floor layered with smooth ice that glistened faintly under Kira's dim glow, while the ceiling vanished into shadow so high that Aaron could not see where it ended. The silence here was different from the other passages they had passed. It was thick, as though sound itself was swallowed before it could carry, and Aaron found himself whispering without meaning to, uneasy in the oppressive stillness. He had expected more of the clicking creatures to follow them, but the flare, Crystal's brilliance, had bought them more than just escape. It had driven their pursuers back entirely, leaving behind an absence that felt unnatural. Kira moved carefully across the chamber, her crystalline frame reflecting faint prisms of color from the jagged surfaces, and for a moment, Aaron thought she almost looked like a piece of the cavern itself come to life. He trailed close, his survival blade still in hand, though he knew it was a poor defense against something that could walk through walls of ice. His eyes scanned the ground and walls, searching for movement, but nothing stirred, yet the sense of being watched grew heavier with every step, prickling the back of his neck and tightening his chest until it was difficult to breathe. They reached the center of the chamber, where the ice dipped into a shallow basin, its surface oddly smooth as if something had polished it over years. Aaron crouched, brushing his gloved fingers across the surface, and froze when he realized the basin was warm. Faint heat seeping through the frost as though the ice concealed something alive beneath it. He quickly pulled his hand back, his expression tightening. Kira knelt beside him, her inner light flickering nervously, and placed her palm against the surface. Her veins flared brighter in alarm. "This is not natural," she whispered, her crystalline voice sharp. The Alari spoke of frozen moons that were hollowed out from within, where something ancient stirred beneath the ice. "We thought they were stories to frighten younglings, but now—" She trailed off, staring at the basin with a look Aaron had never seen on her face before, fear laced with recognition. Before Aaron could respond, the ground vibrated again, not in a sudden jolt like before, but in a slow, steady pulse, as though the basin was breathing. The frost around its edge cracked softly, lines spreading outward like veins, and Aaron stumbled back, gripping Kira's arm. "We need to move," he said quickly, his instincts screaming that they should not be standing here when whatever lay below decided to rise. But before they could retreat, the silence shattered with a sound unlike anything Aaron had ever heard. A deep, resonant hum, more felt than heard, vibrating through his bones and filling the chamber like a living force. The ice around them shimmered as though reacting to the sound, and then, from the shadows above, shapes began to shift. At first, they looked like fragments of the ceiling breaking loose, jagged slabs tumbling downward. But as they neared, Aaron saw wings, vast, translucent wings of crystalline ice, attached to slender bodies that glowed faintly with the same blue light as the basin. They did not crash to the ground but hovered, suspended by some unseen force, their movements eerily graceful as they circled high above. Unlike the burrowers they had fled before, these creatures were silent, their wings slicing through the air without sound, their glowing eyes fixed on the intruders below. Aaron counted 3, then 5, then more, until nearly a dozen floated in slow, deliberate arcs, each one moving as though guided by the same mind. He gripped his blade tighter, though he knew it would be useless, and beside him Kira stood frozen. Her glow dimmed, her gaze locked on the swarm. "They are the Sentinels," she said at last, her voice hollow, as if speaking a name carried weight. Aaron shot her a sharp look, but before he could ask, one of the creatures dipped lower, its crystalline body reflecting the chamber's light in dazzling bursts, and released a piercing hum that echoed the basin's pulse. The sound made Aaron stagger, pain flaring behind his eyes, and when he blinked he thought he saw visions, images not his own. Vast frozen plains, alien skies, towers of crystal cities long since broken, and in their ruins these same creatures hovering above, not as predators but as guardians. The vision faded as quickly as it came, leaving Aaron gasping, unsure whether it had been real or simply the hum burrowing into his mind. Kira, however, had fallen to her knees, her body trembling with inner light as though the sound had reached deep into her core. "They know me," she whispered, her voice unsteady. "They are searching." Aaron pulled her to her feet, his grip firm. Searching for what? But before Kira could answer, the Sentinels descended lower, their silent wings sweeping closer, and their glowing eyes flared brighter, focusing on the two of them with unmistakable intent. Instinct told Aaron they were not here to feed like the burrowers. Their movements were too measured, too precise, like guards examining trespassers. The hum rose again, pressing against Aaron's skull until he gritted his teeth in pain, and this time the vision that followed was clearer. A towering crystalline figure standing at the heart of the cavern, holding a shard of light in one hand, and kneeling before it, an Alari with veins that glowed brighter than any he had seen. The image vanished and Aaron stumbled back, breath ragged, while Kira's crystalline features reflected shock. "It is a memory," she whispered. "They hold the memories of this place." Aaron swallowed hard, his mind racing. If these creatures carried memories, if they had survived through generations as living archives, then the basin beneath them might be more than just heat and movement. It might be a vault of something ancient, something powerful enough that even Kira's people had buried it in myth. The sentinels hovered closer, and Aaron realized escape was no longer their only problem. They had been judged, and though he could not read alien eyes, he felt the weight of a decision pressing against them. He tightened his grip on his blade, though it shook in his hand, while Kira stepped forward, her inner glow rising, her voice firm despite the tremor in her frame. "We are not enemies," she called, her words echoing in the hollow silence. "We seek only to survive." The hum shifted softer now, as if the sentinels considered her words, but the basin below pulsed stronger, cracks widening, and Aaron felt cold dread crawl up his spine. Whatever lay beneath was awakening, and the sentinels, guardians or not, would not let them leave until its purpose was revealed. The chamber seemed to pulse like the heartbeat of a sleeping giant, each vibration rolling through the ice and echoing up Aaron's boots until his bones rattled. The sentinels hovered in their silent circle above, their glowing eyes fixed on the basin as if waiting for something they had guarded for countless years to finally rise. Kira stood stiff, her glow flickering in nervous waves that betrayed her. Fear though her stance tried to remain firm, and Aaron could not stop staring at the cracked spider webbing across the smooth ice at their feet, each fracture glowing faintly with a pale light that came from deep below. He had faced storms, battles, and near-death crashes before, but nothing had filled him with this kind of dread. The dread of standing before something unknown, something not meant for him, something ancient that did not care if he lived or died. The hum in the air grew louder, pressing against his chest, and when he tried to speak, the words caught in his throat. The ice at the center of the basin bulged upward, slow and steady, like the surface of water beginning to break. And then with a sound like splitting thunder, the top layer shattered, throwing shards in every direction. Aaron shielded his face as frozen fragments rained down, and when he lowered his arm, he saw it, an object rising from the broken heart of the basin. Not a creature as he feared, but a structure, sharp-edged and impossibly smooth, like a spire carved from light itself. It lifted slowly, glowing brighter the higher it came, until the whole chamber was washed in its radiance, and the sentinels bowed their crystalline wings toward it in silent reverence. Kira stumbled forward, her face, illuminated by the spire's glow, her veins burning with the same color as though her body answered its call. Aaron reached for her arm, but she shook him off, her eyes locked on the structure with something between awe and sorrow. "It is the core," she whispered, voice trembling. "I thought it was only legend, the first crystal born of our people, the heart of our origin. It was said to be lost, hidden so that no one could ever claim its power." Aaron frowned, his grip tightening on his blade, though he knew it meant nothing here. If it's so important, then why bury it in a frozen moon where nothing lives? Kira glanced at him briefly, her expression grave. "Because it is alive. It remembers. And what it remembers can shape what will be." Her words made no sense to him, but the urgency in her tone sent a chill crawling across his skin. The spire's light flared again, and the cracks in the basin spread wider, revealing more of its buried form until Aaron realized it was not just a spire, but the tip of something much larger, an entire tower entombed beneath the ice, slowly awakening after centuries of silence. The hum in the chamber shifted, no longer a vibration but a chorus, layered tones that resonated like voices overlapping in perfect harmony. Aaron pressed his hands against his ears, but still the sound filled his skull, dragging his mind into visions not his own. He saw endless halls of crystal filled with Ilari figures, their veins glowing with the same light as Kira, kneeling before the core as it pulsed with living brilliance. He saw cities rising from ice plains, towers stretching into alien skies, their foundations infused with shards of the core, every building alive, every wall a vessel of memory. He saw those same cities fall, collapsing under storms of shadow and fire, the Alari fleeing into the stars, their guardians sealing the core beneath the ice where no enemy could reach it. The visions came too fast, too sharp until Aaron staggered, clutching his head, his breath ragged as if he had lived through centuries in the span of seconds. When the images faded, he fell to one knee, gasping for air, and looked at Kira. She was on the ground too, her body shaking, but her expression was different. Where his face was twisted in pain, hers was lit with realization, as though the visions had given her more than torment. They had given her a calling. The sentinels descended, surrounding them in a wide circle, and for the first time Aaron noticed how their eyes flickered not just with cold alien light but with fragments of memory, as though they themselves carried pieces of the past. One lowered close, its wings barely stirring the air, and extended a crystalline limb toward Kira. She reached out, her hand trembling, and when her fingers touched its surface, her entire frame shone so brightly that Aaron had to shield his eyes. The hum grew softer, almost like a song now, and Kira turned toward him, her face pale with both fear and purpose. "They have chosen me," she said quietly, almost in disbelief. "The core calls for a guardian once more, and it has chosen me to awaken it fully." Aaron's stomach sank as he realized what that meant. "If you do that," he said quickly, "what happens to us? We need rescue, not more trouble." Kira shook her head. "Rescue will never come if this is left incomplete. The core stirs, and if it awakens without balance, it could tear this moon apart." Aaron looked around the chamber, at the glowing cracks, at the way the floor trembled harder with each pulse, and he knew she wasn't exaggerating. The place was unraveling, and if the tower beneath them truly was alive, then whatever force had kept it contained was failing. He grabbed Kira's shoulders, meeting her glowing eyes. "If you're doing this, I'm not leaving you." She blinked, startled, and for a brief moment something softer flickered in her expression, but the urgency returned just as quickly. "Then hold on," she said, "because once it begins, there is no turning back." She stepped forward, toward the rising core, and the sentinels parted, their silent wings folding back in acknowledgement. Aaron followed close, his heart pounding, knowing that this was no longer about survival but about facing something vast and ancient that neither of them truly understood. The spire pulsed one last time, brighter than a star, and as Kira placed her hands against its surface, the chamber shook with such force that Aaron nearly lost his footing. Ice shattered, the glow consumed them, and in that blinding light he felt the frozen moon itself awaken. The light swallowed everything for a moment, a blinding brilliance that erased shadows and even the sense of time. And when Aaron blinked through it, he found himself standing not in the frozen chamber but within a space that seemed endless, a hall of crystal pillars stretching into infinity, their surfaces alive with moving shapes like memories replaying themselves across time. The floor beneath him was solid, yet it pulsed faintly like a living heartbeat, and the silence was so complete it seemed to ring in his ears. Kira stood ahead, her body glowing brighter than he had ever seen, her crystalline veins burning like rivers of molten light as she held her hands pressed against the core's surface. The massive structure towered above her, alive and awake, humming with a resonance that Aaron felt more in his chest than in his ears. The sentinels were nowhere to be seen, but he sensed their presence folded into the walls, watching silently, waiting. He tried to step closer, but the air resisted him like pushing against water, each movement harder than the last, as though the place itself judged his approach. Kira's eyes were open, but she was no longer looking at him. She was seeing something beyond, caught in a dialogue he could not hear. Her lips moved without sound, and the core answered with pulses of light that vibrated through the pillars, shaking loose flashes of memory into the space around them. Aaron saw whole civilizations rise and fall in those flashes. Ships of crystal, carving through stars, cities blooming and dying on alien worlds, guardians kneeling in loyalty before the core, only to fade into dust when their time was done. He understood then that Kira was not just speaking but being weighed, her worth measured against centuries of those who had come before. The air thickened further, And suddenly Aaron was caught too, dragged into visions he had no control over. He saw himself as the core saw him, an outsider, fragile and brief, a creature of flesh and fleeting time. Yet within that image the core lingered, as if uncertain, testing the edges of him, probing his memories. He felt it touch the moment he had lifted Arinya's sword back on the frontier world, though that seemed a lifetime ago, and then it shifted further into his past, his training days, the crash that nearly killed his unit, the stubborn moments. He had refused to yield when everyone else had said it was hopeless. The core pressed deeper, showing him his own weaknesses, the doubts he never spoke, the times he had felt useless in the vastness of the galaxy. But instead of dismissing him, the vision paused, the pulse of light steadying as if it found something curious in his flaws. He gasped for breath, his chest tight, and tried to break free of its grip. But the core pulled harder until he felt his thoughts spilling into the endless chamber, unhidden, laid bare. Kira turned suddenly, her voice sharp and clear now. "It looks at you as well," she said, her tone full of both wonder and alarm. "It should not, but it does." Aaron staggered toward her, his muscles burning against the heavy air. "What does it want?" he demanded, though his voice cracked under the weight of the space. Kira's glow flickered, her expression strained as she fought to remain connected to the core. "A choice," she answered. "It tests you as it tests me. It is not satisfied with one guardian. It remembers that bonds are stronger when two stand together. It looks into you because it sees something different." The light surged brighter at her words, and Aaron felt it probe him again, pressing at his instincts, his loyalties, his stubborn refusal to let go of those he cared for even when it cost him. He shouted into the silence, forcing his words through the pressure. "I'm not one of you. I don't have veins of crystal or ancient memories. I can't be what you're asking." The core answered not with words, but with a wave of warmth that shook the floor beneath his feet, a resonance that whispered into his bones. It showed him a vision of Kira alone before the core, her body burning too brightly, consumed by its energy until she shattered like glass under the weight of the bond. Then it showed another vision. Kira with him beside her, their lights intertwined, her burden lessened, the core steady, the moon intact. The message was clear, and it left him breathless. Kira stumbled, nearly collapsing, and Aaron lunged forward, catching her just as her glow dimmed dangerously low. She gripped his arm, her eyes frantic. "It cannot be done alone," she whispered, her voice weak. "If I try, I will break and the core will fall into chaos. But if you accept, if you let it bind to you as well, it will hold steady. It is not our way, Aaron. It was never meant to be shared with an outsider, but it asks, and if you refuse, we will both die here." Aaron looked at her, at the desperation in her face and at the core towering above them, its light pulsing with expectation. His mind raced. This was not what he wanted, not what he signed up for. He wanted rescue, a warm ship, a return to familiar stars. But as he stared into Kira's glowing eyes, he knew he could not watch her break apart under the weight of a destiny she could not carry alone. He tightened his grip on her and turned toward the core. "If it wants me," he said, voice steady despite his pounding heart, "then it has me. But I do this on one condition: it keeps her alive." The core flared, so bright the pillars shook, and then the world fell silent. A rush of energy tore through Aaron's chest, searing him from within, filling every vein with fire until he screamed. He felt his body twist under the weight of the bond, the core embedding itself into his very marrow, his vision white with pain. Through it all, he sensed Kira's hand clutching his, her glow merging with his own as though their lights braided together. The agony reached its peak, then steadied into a rhythm, like two hearts beating as one, and suddenly he could breathe again. The chamber stilled, the pillars calmed, and for the first time Aaron felt not like an intruder but like a part of something larger. Kira leaned against him, her voice ragged but alive. "It has chosen us both," she said, disbelief mixing with relief. Aaron opened his eyes, and for an instant he saw his own veins faintly glowing with light. not as strong as Kira's, but there nonetheless, a mark of the bond that had been forced upon him. Above them, the core pulsed once, twice, and then sank back into silence, its radiance dimming until only the faint heartbeat of its presence remained. The chamber faded around them, and suddenly they were back in the frozen basin, the cracks now sealed, the ice unbroken as though nothing had ever stirred. The sentinels hovered overhead, their wings folding inward in a gesture of acknowledgement, and then they retreated into the shadows, leaving Aaron and Kira standing alone in the quiet. He staggered, his body heavy, his veins still burning faintly with the afterglow, and he looked at her, confused and shaken. "So what now?" he asked. Kira's expression was unreadable, but her voice carried the weight of truth. "Now we are both bound," she said softly, "and neither of us will ever be the same again." The cold silence of the frozen moon returned around them, yet nothing felt the same, for Aaron and Kira carried within them the echo of the core, a weight and a fire that had fused into their very beings, and though the storm had stilled, the air itself seemed to bow to their presence as if the world now recognized them as part of its hidden order. Aaron staggered slightly as they stepped away from the basin, his body still adjusting to the strange rhythm pulsing in his veins, a second heartbeat that was not his own. And every breath he drew came with a whisper of energy that felt both alien and familiar. Kira walked beside him, her crystalline glow no longer wild and uncontrolled but tempered, steady, though her expression remained troubled, for she understood far better than him what the binding meant and what dangers it might call upon them. They moved slowly through the icy canyons, searching for shelter again. Yet the snow beneath their boots carried no ordinary sound now, each step reverberating faintly as if the moon itself listened. Aaron glanced toward the horizon where dark clouds were forming again, but these clouds were not natural storm fronts. They twisted unnaturally, as though drawn by something unseen, and for the first time he realized their trial with the core had not ended, but had only awakened another challenge. Kira's eyes flickered toward the sky, her voice quiet but sharp with tension. "Something comes. The core does not awaken without consequence. What we carry is not invisible. Others will feel it." He frowned, his instinct as a soldier pulling onward. "Others? You mean your people?" She shook her head, the crystals in her skin catching the pale light. "Not my people, not yours. Something older, something that once tried to seize what we now hold and was cast into the dark between stars." Her words chilled him more than the frost ever could, but before he could press for answers, the ground trembled, a low vibration rolling beneath the ice as if some vast engine had stirred far below. Aaron reached instinctively for the pulse of power inside him, not yet knowing how to call upon it but sensing it was there, ready, waiting. Kira raised her hand and the glow flared in her veins, her body acting as both shield and beacon. From the storm above, a shadow broke free, descending fast. Not a creature of flesh, but a machine of alien design, black spires twisting into wings that folded and unfolded like knives of obsidian. It landed on the ridge with a shriek that split the air, and its eyes, if they could be called that, burned with a hungry red light that fixed directly upon them. Aaron's breath caught. This was no sentinel. It was older, crueler, and its very presence bled hostility. Kira's face paled as recognition struck her. "A warden," she whispered. "A relic of those who once tried to steal the core's light. I thought they were destroyed, but the core's awakening has called it back." The machine leapt down with unnatural speed, the ice cracking under its weight, and Aaron stepped in front of Kira by instinct, though he knew he was no match for such a thing. Yet as the warden's shadow fell across them, the bond within him surged, and suddenly his veins glowed faintly again, answering Kira's light without his will. His body moved before thought, his arm raising as if guided by something larger, and a pulse of raw energy exploded outward, striking the ice and forcing the warden back a step. The force nearly knocked him to his knees, his chest burning from the effort, but it proved something important. The core's gift was not bound to Kira alone. She steadied him quickly, her hand gripping his. "Do not resist it," she urged. "It will answer if you let it, but if you fight it, it will break you. Trust it. Trust me." He met her eyes, his breath ragged, and nodded, though his instincts screamed otherwise. The warden screeched again, its wings unfurling as it launched forward, blades of energy extending from its arms. Kyra's light flared bright, forming a shield of crystal energy around them, but the strike still cracked it, the impact ringing like shattering glass. Aaron threw himself forward, channeling the pulse again, and this time he felt it flow not just from him but from the bond itself, a stream of force weaving between their hands. The blast struck true, sending the warden crashing into the cliffside, its black armor cracking, though its red eyes still glowed with burning hate. Aaron collapsed to one knee, his strength draining, but Kira pulled him up. "You cannot bear it alone. We must stand together, think as one, move as one." He swallowed hard and focused, letting go of his need for control, allowing their lights to merge fully, and in that instant something extraordinary happened. The bond steadied, their pulses syncing perfectly, and the power that had nearly torn him apart now flowed smoothly, a river rather than a storm. The warden rose again, but this time Aaron did not flinch. He and Kira stepped forward together, their glow merging into a brilliant arc, and with one strike they unleashed a wave that shattered the ridge itself, burying the machine in a cascade of ice and stone. Silence followed, broken only by the hiss of settling snow, and for a moment it seemed the danger had passed, but Kira's expression remained grim. "That was only one," she said softly. "If the wardens have awakened, more will come, and each will be stronger than the last. The core gave us power not as a gift but as a duty. We are now its shield whether we wished it or not." Aaron looked out toward the storm-filled horizon, the weight of her words pressing heavily on him. He had wanted survival, nothing more, but now survival meant something greater. He placed his hand on the hilt of his weapon, though he knew steel alone would never be enough again. "Then we fight," he said firmly, his voice steady despite the dread curling inside him. "As long as we stand together, they won't take it." Kira studied him, her crystalline glow steadying as though his resolve gave her strength, and, at last she nodded. "Together," she agreed. The storm thickened above them, the horizon dark with approaching shadows, and though the frozen moon remained silent, Aaron knew the quiet would not last. Whatever future awaited them was uncertain, but it would not be a return to the lives they once knew. The core had bound them, and the galaxy had felt its awakening. And somewhere in that unseen future, forces older and darker than either of them could imagine were already moving to claim what they had become.